For my speech, I decided to talk about why to keep the Second Amendment. There's been several conversations and issues across the nation on rather why we should keep the Second Amendment or we should abolish it. There's been a lot of talk in the government as well between political parties, so that's been one of the major issues across our nation. First, I'm going to talk about what the Second Amendment is. The straight definition out of the Bill of Rights is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Basically, a summary of that is we have the right to bear arms, and that by arms is firearms, any type of gun and ammunition to keep in our home that suits us for personal needs, rather that be hunting or even protecting ourselves in our own homes. Some pros of the Second Amendment. The first one I'll talk about is self-protection. And right under that I have home protection. Those kind of run the same way. Basically, if you have a intruder in your house, you're going to have a firearm to protect yourself. A con of that is if you don't have a firearm and somebody does have a firearm and break into your house, you're already at a disadvantage. If you have a baseball bat and somebody has a gun, the gun is probably going to win. It's a basic civil right. They put it in the Bill of Rights for a reason. When the United States was forming against the British, they wanted to be able to form an army so we could fight for our own individual rights as a country, and that's how we formed our nation, on being able to possess firearms and fight for our own freedoms and what we believe in. Protection of others, that is a very big one right now. For example, is a good shooter versus bad shooter, which would be an example of a school shooter, somebody coming into a school with a firearm or sneaking in a firearm into a school with thoughts of hurting others. Well, if there's a policeman on campus with a gun and they fire that firearm and kill the person that has the gun trying to hurt everybody else, well, that completely ends it. There's going to be nobody else hurt in the situation. So that's an example of a good shooter versus bad shooter. The last pro I put on here is a well-regulated militia to protect our country. As I just talked about, it was when the United States was fighting against Great Britain. But nowadays, there's so much terrorism, you never know when anything could happen in our country. There's been arguments with Russia, North Korea. You just never know when anything could happen. And if we're all equipped with firearms, then we can form a militia and be able to protect ourselves and our homes, our states, and our country. Now I'm going to talk about some cons. The biggest con, which has caused several problems the past few years, would be mass shootings. There's been mass shootings at clubs, and there's also been mass shootings in schools. This has been a really big problem. Gang violence is another big issue with gun control. That causes a lot of problems in the streets in some really big towns and bad towns, and sometimes that even results in hurting civilians. And another really big one is criminals. Of course, you never want bad people to be in possessions of guns, but they choose to use guns because they feel that's going to scare people more than a knife. But that is what the main tool that a robber or criminal would use to break into a home or to break into a store. And I'm personally in favor of keeping the amendment as it is. I think we need guns to be able to protect ourselves, and I feel that it is a civil right of ours. But I did include a slide talking about possible resolutions which could prevent these negatives and cons that I just talked about. And that main thing is screening on all the gun and ammunition sales, basically background checks on whoever buys guns and ammunition in the United States. I think this would be a really helpful thing to do in seeing who has firearms and who doesn't. I don't feel you should take away firearms because there's just so much that could go wrong. And again, I said it's a civil right. And if you take away guns from everybody in the United States, they're still going to get guns. There's still several ways for criminals and everybody that's causing these mass shootings and bad occurrences, they can still get guns. It's not going to stop the income of guns. But in conclusion, that's some pros and cons about the Second Amendment. And on my own opinion, I feel that we should keep the Second Amendment the way it is. Thank you.